In October 1994, the quiet town of Union, South Carolina, became the center of one of America's most haunting murder cases. Susan Smith, a 23-year-old mother of two, made a frantic call to police, claiming a black man had carjacked her vehicle and driven away with her sons inside. Her story sparked a nationwide search. News outlets aired emotional pleas as Susan appeared on television, crying for the safe return of 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander. The entire country sympathized with the young mother's apparent anguish, but behind the tears and media attention lay a lie so cruel that it would shock even the most hardened detectives. 9 days later, on November 4th, 1994, the truth unraveled. Susan broke down during questioning and confessed that there had been no carjacking at all. In a chilling admission, she revealed that she had driven her car to a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake and released the handbrake, letting the vehicle roll into the dark water with her two sons still strapped into their car seats. The toddlers drowned as the car sank, and Susan stood watching in silence as her children disappeared beneath the surface. Her motive was as disturbing as her crime. Investigators discovered that Susan had been romantically involved with a wealthy local businessman, Tom Finley, who had recently broken off their relationship because he didn't want children. Desperate to win him back, Susan believed her sons were obstacles to her happiness. In what she later called a mental confusion, she ended their lives, an act that would forever define her name in true crime history. By the time police pulled the submerged car from the lake, the entire nation had turned from compassion to outrage. The story of a grieving mother had transformed into a tale of betrayal and horror. When Susan Smith finally confessed, America was horrified. On November 4th, 1994, police recovered the car from John D. Long Lake, with the lifeless bodies of Michael and Alexander still buckled in their car seats. The image of the small boys, dressed in their pajamas, would forever haunt the public's memory. Within days, Susan was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her trial began in July 1995 in Union County, South Carolina. Prosecutors painted a dark picture of a woman who killed her children to pursue a child-free romance. They argued that Susan's desire to rekindle her relationship with Tom Findley, who had clearly told her he didn't want kids, was the motive behind the murders. Findley himself testified, revealing a breakup letter he'd written days before the killings, saying he wanted to move on and that her children were part of the problem. The defense, however, portrayed Susan as a deeply troubled young woman, suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts. Her lawyers claimed she didn't intend to kill her sons, that she had meant to end her own life with them, but lost the courage to go through with it at the last moment. They argued she was not a cold-blooded killer, but a mentally ill woman who made an irreversible mistake. After a trial that lasted less than a week, the jury took just 2.5 hours to deliver their verdict. Guilty on both counts of murder. But instead of sentencing her to death, the jury opted for life imprisonment, making her eligible for parole after 30 years in 2024. One juror later told reporters, "We all felt like Susan was a really disturbed person. Giving her the death penalty wouldn't serve justice." Outside the courthouse, the boy's father, David Smith, wept as he spoke to reporters. "I'll never forget what Susan did, and I'll never forget Michael and Alex. Me and my family are disappointed the death penalty wasn't the verdict." Susan Smith began her life sentence in July 1995 at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. At just 23 years old, she had lost her freedom, her reputation, and any chance of redemption in the eyes of the public. Susan's new life behind bars began at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. To the outside world, she was the woman who murdered her children. But inside prison walls, her story took on new and troubling chapters. Not long after she was incarcerated, Susan began attracting headlines again, this time for inappropriate relationships with prison guards. In 2000, investigators discovered that she had been having sexual encounters with not one, but two correctional officers. The first, 50-year-old guard Houston Cagle, was found to have had sex with Susan multiple times inside the facility. He was fired, jailed for 3 months, and Susan was disciplined. Only months later, another officer, Captain Alfred Rowe, confessed to having sexual contact with her as well. Rowe was arrested and later sentenced to 5 years probation. Because of these incidents, Susan was transferred to Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina, a higher security facility where extra precautions were taken. Prison officials no longer allowed her to be alone with any guard. She was always escorted by at least 2 officers, often a man and a woman. No one trusts her to be alone with a guard, a source at the prison told People. But her behavioral issues didn't stop there. Prison records show she faced multiple disciplinary actions between 2010 and 2017 for drug use, possession of narcotics, and self-mutilation. At times, she lost visitation, canteen, and phone privileges for over a year. One of her former cellmates even claimed that Susan's drug use increased after her transfer, suggesting she had replaced her addiction to male attention with an addiction to drugs. According to former cellmate Christy Smith, Susan was known among inmates for her secret access to pills. She told Lifetime's Cellmate Secrets, "I've seen Susan do everything: snort, swallow, shoot, you name it." Despite the scandals, Susan tried to reinvent her image. She began telling reporters she had found religion and was a changed woman. She wrote in a 2015 letter to the state newspaper, "I am not the monster society thinks I am. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself. I loved my boys." By 2020, Susan had reportedly become more focused on securing her freedom. With her parole date approaching in 2024, she began following prison rules more closely. She's behaving herself these days. She knows her parole date is close, and she can't afford any trouble now. As Susan Smith approached her 30th year behind bars, she began to dream again of love, freedom, and a second chance at life. Around 2021, she started corresponding with a divorced man who had seen a documentary about her case. The two exchanged handwritten letters, talking about forgiveness, faith, and even a possible marriage if she were ever released. "I can't wait to build a life with you," she wrote. "Leave the past mistakes behind and start fresh." But by late 2022, the romance had faded, just like every promise of redemption she'd ever made. In November 2024, Susan Smith finally faced the South Carolina Parole Board, hoping to convince them that she was no longer the woman who rolled her car into that cold lake 3 decades earlier. Dressed neatly and speaking softly, she told the board, "I know what I did was horrible. I'm a Christian and God has forgiven me. I only ask that you show me the same mercy." But mercy was not on the table. After a brief hearing, the board denied her request for release. Smith would remain behind bars, with her next chance for parole coming in November 2026. Her ex-husband, David Smith, made sure of it. Standing before the parole board, his voice shaking with anger and grief, he said, "This wasn't a tragic mistake. She purposely meant to end their lives. 30 years is just not enough." He vowed to appear every 2 years to fight against her release, to make sure Michael and Alexandra's deaths don't go in vain. Now 53 years old, Susan Smith remains at Leith Correctional Institution, largely isolated from the outside world. Her story has become a dark reminder of how lies and desperation can turn into unimaginable tragedy. In a February 2025 Dateline interview, David Smith reflected on the day his ex-wife confessed. She just said, "I'm sorry," like it was nothing, he recalled. "I asked her why she did it, and she said, 'I don't know why, but I'm sorry.'" 31 years later, the nation still remembers Susan Smith, not for who she wanted to be, but for what she did. A mother who turned a lake into a grave, a community's sympathy into rage, and her children's love into the most haunting confession of the 1990s. In 1994, America wept with her. In 1995, America condemned her. Today, Susan Smith remains a prisoner of her own choices, a chilling reminder that evil can wear a mother's face. 31 years have passed since Susan Smith rolled her car into that dark South Carolina lake, a lake that became both a grave and a symbol of betrayal. A mother who once begged the world for sympathy turned out to be the very monster she warned us about. Behind those prison walls, Susan Smith says she's found God, says she's changed, says she's sorry. But for many, forgiveness can't rise from the water that claimed 2 innocent lives. Michael and Alexander never got the chance to grow up. Their laughter was silenced, their childhood stolen, all in the name of a mother's selfish desire for love. And while Susan dreams of freedom, David Smith continues to show up every 2 years, standing before the parole board, reminding the world of what she did and why she can never be free. Because some crimes don't fade with time, they echo forever.